Freedom. Freedom. Endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, but defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. Let's begin by asking all those who have served, our veterans, all those who are serving, be it in active duty, the Guard, or the Reserve. And since it was Military Spouses Day yesterday, let's invite their spouses and family members. Let's have them all stand up and give them a round of applause. Thank you to each and every one of you. We're going to talk about freedom today. And I know you love your country. It's why you serve. We love this great country we call America. Thank you for making it possible for us to have events like this. You know, I got to begin by saying thanks. It's great to be back in South Carolina. It's great to be back in Greenville. In fact, the last time I was here, we not only talked to grassroots activists, I actually went over to the Harley-Davidson dealership and picked up a T-shirt. It's warm enough today that if I wasn't off to Israel this afternoon, I might actually rent a motorcycle like the Road King I have back at home and go ride a little bit. But I can guarantee you, sometime this summer, I'm going to convince my team that I'm going to get on a bike and ride around the state of South Carolina, because it'd be a lot of fun. And looking at this crowd, thank you for coming out here today, but thank you, because I know many of you helped us just a few years ago when we faced quite a battle just up the way in Wisconsin. Back when we faced the one and only recall that's been successful in America, so many people here and so many people across this state and across this country, you helped us out. You made phone calls. Some of you even literally physically came up and knocked down some doors for us. You sent in 20 or 30 bucks along the way. We thank you for that. But most importantly, Tonette and I particularly appreciate how many of you told us you prayed for us. That meant the world to us. And don't stop praying. We appreciate it along the way. It's interesting for us, that's in a way kind of how things started back in 2009. Tonette and I were sitting down and talking about, thinking about, ultimately praying about getting into the race for governor. We knew it would be tough in our state because you see in Wisconsin, there's more Democrats than Republicans in our state. In fact, the last time a Republican carried the state for president was 1984. That's when I was in high school and I had a much bigger head of hair. And so that's a tough state, but we knew we had faced tough battles before. Dave mentioned in that introduction, even before running for governor, back in 2002, Tonette and I were sons in a place called Milwaukee County. We live in a town today called Wauwatosa, where our family home is at. And there was a big scandal in that county. The guy who had been the county executive had gotten the county into trouble. In fact, they tried to, ironically, there was an attempt to recall him. They needed to collect signatures. They got double what they needed. He was about to be recalled, and he resigned about a week after I announced that if he didn't get out of the way, I was going to run for county. I thought about running for county executive before. No Republican had ever, sometimes people say, how many years was it since the Republican had won? I say never. Never, ever had there been a Republican in that spot before. But we knew, for Matt and for Alex and for all the other sons and daughters like them, we needed a better county. And a few years later, after we had done 8 consecutive years without raising the property tax from the previous year in the budgets we introduced, after we had reduced the size of the workforce and the debt by 25+%, after we had not just gotten our economic and financial things in order in that county, but we'd literally done good things like our park system won a gold medal for the best park system in the country. We knew that if we could turn a place like Milwaukee County around, we knew that we could take on that kind of battle that was going to be needed at the state level. And people said, well, why would you take on that challenge knowing how difficult it would be to win in Wisconsin? I said I had 2 simple reasons. Matt and Alex. Those are our 2 boys. And for Tonette and I as parents, we said it was unacceptable to think that our sons would grow up in a state that wasn't as great as the state that we grew up in. And so we got in that election, we won the battle, and then shortly after we took office in January of 2011, you may have heard about it, but we did some pretty big things. And at one point, we had more than 100,000 protesters in and around our Capitol. And we had not just threats, we had death threats against me and my family. My kids were targeted on Facebook. My parents even got grief at our home in Wauwatosa. But you know, throughout it all that did, their intent there was to intimidate us. That's what they do. They try to intimidate at the federal, at the state, even at the local level. But instead, we knew it reminded us to refocus on why we got elected in the first place, to think more about the next generation than just about the next election. And the great thing was it worked. It worked. Today, the state I'm proud to lead that once in January of 2010 had an unemployment rate of 9.2%. Right before I took office in December of that year, it was 8.1%. Last month, it moved down to 4.6% unemployment. A state that when we took office was ranked, every year there's these rankings of the best and the worst states to do business in. Back in 2010, you know where Wisconsin was at? 41st in the country in that ranking. Just a day ago, that ranking came out. You know where Wisconsin is today? 12th best state in the country for doing business and creating jobs. When we came in, we inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. Every year I've been in office, we've had a surplus. At the end of the budget we're debating right now for our next 2 years in my state, we will end with a structural surplus of $499 million, nearly $500 million on the structural side of things. Our pension is fully funded, the only one in the country. Our bond rating is strong. Our rainy day fund's 165 times bigger than we took office. But it was more than just economic and fiscal issues. I'm proud to say in our state, we took on other big challenges as well. We took on regulations and litigation. We made it sane again so that we enforce common sense, not just bureaucratic red tape. We took on things like now we've defunded in our first budget Planned Parenthood and passed pro-life legislation. We believe in the sanctity of life, and on top of that, we signed concealed carry and castle doctrines so people can protect themselves, their family, and their property. Something you all can appreciate here, but we are now, who would think, in the Midwest, we'd be the 25th state in the country to have the right to work, the freedom to work where you want, regardless of a labor union or not. And I'm proud to say earlier this year, the United States Supreme Court finally signed off and gave us the ability to enforce the law I signed a few years ago, shortly after taking office, that says we want to make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. And in Wisconsin, you need a photo ID to vote in the state of Wisconsin. And so the reason I tell you that all here today is not to brag, well, not much, but rather to tell you that if all those common sense conservative reforms can happen in a state that hasn't voted for a Republican for president since 1984, I got to tell you, in America, we have leadership that's willing to go big and go bold in Washington. We can make America great again. I believe that's why you're here. I know I love this country. Do you? Yeah. And we love it not just for ourselves, we love it for our children and our grandchildren and future generations. So let me tell you 3 quick ways why I think it's important for us to chart out a new path for leadership in this country. First off, when it comes to growth, we need to be talking about growth, not just about austerity. I'm all about balanced budgets. I've done it many times in the past. And we've got to deal with the debt and deficits in this country, but we got to do it first and foremost by talking about growth. And there is a stark contrast out there. The president and people like Hillary Clinton, when they talk about growth, they're talking about growing the economy in Washington. Think about it. Last year alone, reports showed that 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America, you know where they're at? In and around Washington, D.C. Well, I got news from them. The majority of us across America, we understand that we create jobs. We create jobs out in the cities and towns and villages across this country, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time to get the government out of the way and start creating more of those jobs. And it's about empowering people and employers to do that. That means getting government out of the way, lower taxes, fewer regulations, repealing things like Obamacare and putting patients back in charge again. Using all the abundance of what God has given us for energy here in this country and in this continent, instead of relying on places around the world that hate us. All those things are about growing the economy. Now I get a kick out of this. In my state, I'm proud to say we've cut the tax burden on the hardworking people of our state by some $2 billion over the past couple of years. In fact, property taxes today in my state are lower today than they were 4 years ago. What governor can say that across America, right? But sometimes I get people that say, well, why are you so obsessed with cutting taxes? And I say it's simple. It's simple. My wife, Toinette, is here with me tonight, or today, I should say, and some 22 years ago, in 1993, we were married, and we just celebrated back on February 6th our wedding anniversary. And I remember not long after we were first married, I went out and committed a really bad act. I went to Kohl's department stores near our house, and I bought something for the price it was marked at. Big mistake. Big mistake. And Toinette said to me, you can never go back to Kohl's until you learn how to shop there. So now I know over the years that if I'm going to buy a shirt, it was $29.99, I go to the rack that says now $19.99, and I go and get the Sunday insert out with the little scratch-off thing that gets me another 15 or 20%. Or maybe I remember to get the flyer out that we got mailed at our house that gets 15 or 20, or man, if we're really lucky, 30% off, right? That's golden. And then we go up to the cash register, and Toinette usually is with, and she'll reach into her purse and pull out some of that Kohl's cash. And next thing you know, when they ring it up, they're paying us to buy the shirts, right? Right? Well, not quite, but it feels like it, right? So how does a great American company like Kohl's make money? They make it off of volume, right? They could sell a few of those shirts at $29.99, or they could lower the price and broaden the volume, and more people could buy their products. Well, that's how I feel about your money, the taxpayers' money. You see, we could charge really high rates, and a few of you might be able to afford it. Or we can lower the rates and broaden the base, and suddenly more people are participating in the economy, right? See, I call that the Kohl's curve. I was just talking to my friend Art Laffer yesterday, and if you know about President Reagan, you know Art was a good advisor for President Reagan. They used to call it the Laffer curve. I said, Art, I love you, but I call it the Kohl's curve now. That's really what it is. It's the Kohl's curve. So first, we got to talk more about growth in this country. Secondly, we need to talk more about reform. We need leadership when it comes to reform. This president and people like Hillary Clinton tend to measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government. Food stamps, unemployment, Medicaid, you name it. We measure success by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government. You see, we understand in America that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that is born of work, that is born of work. You know, Dave in the introduction talked about the small town I was raised in called Delavan. My first job, I remember, was washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. I moved up to high school to the big time. I started flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. In fact, Paul Ryan grew up about 20 miles down the road from me. He was flipping burgers in Janesville while I was flipping them in Delavan. The only difference is true. The only difference is Paul's manager actually told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. You can kid about that. But I think about growing up in Delavan. My dad was a preacher at the First Baptist Church. My mom was a part-time secretary, did some books in town for one of the great clothing stores, and she raised my brother and I. My grandparents, my mom's parents, were farmers who raised my mother at a farm that didn't have indoor plumbing until she went off to junior high school. My dad's dad was a machinist for 42 years at Barbara Coleman, just over the state line in Rockford. When my brother and I look back on our lives as young kids, we really realized that From our family, we didn't inherit fame or fortune. What we inherited was the belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want. That's the American dream. That's the American dream, and we need to fight for that, because sadly there are many of our fellow Americans who feel that's out of reach. It's not out of reach because of Wall Street, it's out of reach because of K Street. We need to get government out of the way and put the power back in the hands of the American people. And finally, I just want to spend a couple moments talking about the third thing I think is important, and that is safety. Somebody say safety. Is that fire and police? So that's important at the local level. But safety to me is what some may call in Washington national security. I call it safety. In a few hours, Tonette and I are going to head off to Israel to meet with folks, including the Prime Minister and others, to talk about the risks that they have. But when I look at not just Israel, I look at that region in the world, I call it safety, because you see, when I watch a Jordanian pilot being burned alive in a cage, when I see Christians from Egypt and elsewhere around the world shot or beheaded just because of their faith, that's something I feel right here. You feel in your heart and your soul. You don't read about it. National security is something you read about in the newspaper. Safety is something you feel. And you start to worry, it's not just about somewhere else around the world. It's something that can happen anywhere. In France, in Belgium, in Canada, in Texas. It can happen anywhere in the world. And I got to tell you, it's something that even though as a governor I don't deal with it day in and day out, it has increasingly become one of the most important things for me to focus in on, because I think about safety. I think about my own children, and I think about yours as well. And I can't tell you how frustrated I am with this president and the people who advised him, like Hillary Clinton, because you've got a president who drew a line in the sand and allowed people to cross it. You got a president who just in the past year has called ISIS the JV squad, who calls Yemen a success story, who calls Iran a place we can do business with. Think about that. On Monday, I just met with the family of a Marine who's been held in Iran since August of 2011. I met with his sister. I met with Sergeant Amir Hekmati's mother and sister. He has been held in an Iranian prison since August of 2011. And it makes me think back to the fact that as a kid, I can remember tying ribbons around the tree in front of our house when Americans were held hostage for 444 days. I know one of those hostages. His name is Kevin Hermaning, and he lives in Wausau, Wisconsin. He was the youngest held for 444 days. Iran has not changed much other than the names are different in terms of who the supreme leader is. We need a president who's going to back away from that deal in Iran and set the record straight. We need a commander-in-chief who will once and for all call it what it is, and that is that radical Islamic terrorism is a threat to us all. We need a president who will affirm that Israel is our ally and start acting like it. And we need a leader in America who will have the courage to look the American people in the eye and tell them what might not be easy to say. And that is, this will not take a day, it might not take a week, it might not take a month or even a year. But I got to tell you, it's not a matter of if another attempt is made on American soil. It is when another attempt is made on American soil. And on behalf of your children and mine, I want a leader who's willing to take the fight to them before they take the fight to us. And so let me just end with telling you one quick story for a minute or two. And that is, I love this country. I'm an optimist. As challenging as these times are, both here in America when it comes to fiscal and economic policy, and certainly around the world, the challenges are great. But I'm an optimist. I believe in the American people. I believe in your love and mine for this great country, and I believe that with the right leadership, we can make it better again when it comes to our nation's capital. And let me tell you why. Certainly, the examples we see across the country and the states is a great testimony to how things have gotten better with common sense conservative leadership over the last few years in our state houses. But let me tell you one last thing about why I believe America will once again be great. And that's because it's a part of our history. It's who we are. You see, as a kid growing up in that small town of Delavan, I got to tell you, maybe I was a little geeky, but I loved history so much, I thought of our founders like superheroes, bigger than life. And so years ago, when I was young, we never had a chance to go to Philadelphia, but a few years back, when Tonette and I got the chance to go to Philadelphia for the first time, I got to tell you, I was all pumped up. Because I got up early in the morning, I went out with the National Park Service, we went over and saw the Liberty Bell, and then we went to Independence Hall. And I thought, here it is, the place where they did that incredible work. I was ready to be blown away. So early on that morning in Philadelphia, we get out, we go into Independence Hall. If any of you have ever been there, you know it's smaller than the stage. It's about the corner of the stage right here where that all happened. And I got out as the sun was rising, and I looked at the desk, and I looked at the chairs, and it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. These were ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. You see, they didn't just risk their political careers. These were people who didn't just risk their business ventures. These were patriots who literally risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. What makes me love this country so much is I think of moments like that, and it reminds me what makes America great, what makes us exceptional, what makes us the greatest country in the history of the world has been all throughout our nation's history. In times of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what has made America amazing has been all throughout those times. There have been men and women of courage who've been willing to think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own futures. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you here once and for all, this is one of those times. This is one of those moments in American history. This is the time when we can look back and tell future generations, we were there. We heeded the call. We did what was required to make America great again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of that movement. God bless you, and let's make America great again.